G'day and welcome back to the world's greatest Morris Minor YouTube channel. On this episode, we are going to be fitting one Tomo powered engine to this Morris Minor. Well, that was a bit of a joke, obviously about the world's greatest Morris Minor channel, because it's probably not, to be honest. Probably one of the worst ideas I've had, getting inside a car on my YouTube channel. So, g'day and welcome back, folks. As I said, on this episode, we are going to be fitting an engine to the Morris Minor. Now, it's not going to be a one Tomo powered engine, it is going to be a revolutionary engine, one that you've never seen before, and I'm super excited to show you guys. So, let's get to it. Alright folks, so let's get straight into this episode and show you this revolutionary engine you've probably never seen before. Now, we are going to be fitting this sucker to the car. Now, this is a revolutionary engine for many, many reasons, and I'm going to tell you them right now. The first reason is it is super lightweight compared to a standard engine. Standard engine's got the crankshaft, it's got the pistons and conrods, it's got a camshaft in there. Hell, we'll even throw in the distributor spindle. So not only is it missing all those parts, but it is super aerodynamic. Now, a really good feature about this engine is that it is not only super aerodynamic, but it allows maximum airflow through, maximum cooling. So if that engine gets hot, bang, air is able to get in and out of that faster than you can say yippee-ki-yay. Have you ever heard of an internal combustion engine? Well, I bet you haven't heard of an external combustion engine. This engine is revolutionary. Not only does it prevent the explosion from happening inside the engine, it happens outside the engine, which allows greater cooling, greater efficiency, and greater heat distribution. So if your car's patined on the outside, why not have it patinaed on the inside? This engine is exactly that. It has all the patina, both inside and outside. Not only is it super lightweight and efficient, but because it's so light and so efficient, you are going to be chopping people all over the place. You're going to be driving down the road going, see you suckers, and absolutely overtaking them, flying past like a bloody bullet train. Call the next 30 minutes and you will receive not only one, but you will receive two high fives. Two high fives over the phone, through Facebook, through the internet, in any way, shape or form possible. Hurry in quickly because this offer cannot last. It will only last and be available for the next 2 days and counting. Make sure you get in. You do not want to miss this offer. If you want nothing more than high fives and handshakes and driving off into the sunset, I'm the guy to see. Send me a message down below, get in touch, and get yours before they run out. Well, that was just completely stupid. Thought I'd have a bit of fun there. Hope you guys enjoyed it. So, what we're going to be doing essentially on this episode is we are going to grab that engine and we are going to fit that gearbox to it. So just behind here, let me just come around. So we have an empty gearbox. Just here, it's got a razor blade on it. I was using it before. We have a sandwich plate as well. This sandwich plate is significantly thicker than the standard one. This will enable extra rigidity. So what happens is when you have a sandwich plate, especially on a Morris Minor like this, or even a Sprite or an MG or a Midget, whatever it is, the flex plate is rather small, so it's only, let's just say 2 to 3 mil thick, and I'm sure someone can comment and let me know exactly how thick they are. That becomes the weakest point. So you have a mount at the front of the engine, so up this side. So you've got a mount sitting here, and then you've also got a mount sitting at the back, so here and on the other side. So the distance between the front of the engine and the back, so where the gearbox will sit, it will sit probably about here, maybe a little bit further. The weakest point then becomes the sandwich plate. So by fitting a thicker sandwich plate in there, it gives the opportunity to make sure that it doesn't become the weakest point, and it's actually going to enable it to be nice and strong. So that's exactly what we're going to do. So what we're going to do is mount the engine to the engine brace. We're going to then put it on the stand. We're going to mount the gearbox to it. Then we're going to throw the gearbox and engine in. We're going to mock it all up. I'm hopefully going to be able to do it myself. I don't see why I couldn't. It looks to be fairly straightforward. I might need to use a chain or two to be able to get everything in, but we should be right to be able to put everything in there. Once it's in, we can then mock it up and get a bit of an idea as to where we need to drill a hole for the gear selector, so where it's going to go up in here. Also need to work out as well how we're going to mount the gearbox mounts. So in that box over there on my seat, That's what Colin gave me, just a couple of bolts in there just to be able to mount the mount the gearbox to the engine. We're going to do that. We're going to throw it in the car, mock it up and see how we go from there. And then hopefully after we've done that, we shouldn't have to make too much modification. Now I have seen, and a lot of people got upset when I put this on Facebook and asked if anyone had ever done it before. A lot of people had obviously just, hacked away at the firewall and the tunnel and stuff, so hopefully we don't have to do that. I really want to try and keep this thing as niche as possible, but also at the same time I want to try and keep it as original as possible. I believe these engines were fitted to the car back in the day. I think they came out with a 850, a 918 side valve, 1098 I believe, and maybe a 1275. I'm sure someone can comment just in the section below and just let me know what engines actually came out with, because I'd be really interested. I need to probably do a bit more research on this. So it might be a case of fitting it, taking it out, fitting it, taking it out. It's just one of those things that you just have to really just dick around with quite a lot just to be able to ensure that the engine's going to fit properly. So let's get straight onto it. But before we do, one quick Tomo's tech tip. When you're working in the workshop, whether it be at home or at work, always make sure you don't just have bare feet, you actually have steel cap boots. Steel cap boots are probably one of the best investments, should I say, that you can buy when working at home, whether you're in the garden, whether you're mowing the lawns, just because of the amount of safety. You don't want to be able to move around and then find out that you run your toe over with the bloody engine crane because you've moved it and crushed your foot. So get yourself a set of safety boots if you don't have some. So guys, if you haven't already, make sure you check out the videos that I do for Mini Sport. I release a video once a week, every Tuesday, Australian Eastern Daylight Time at 10 o'clock. And it just goes through and talks about the different tools and accessories available from Mini Sport, and just helps to clear up some of the grey areas that you may have questions on. Like for instance, how to fit a engine stand bracket to an engine. All right, so what I've actually done here is just gone and got a heap of bolts, worked out the sizes I need in order for them to bolt on the bracket, and then that just enables me to make sure that I always use the same bolts, and I'm not going to reuse them, I'm not going to lose them anywhere. I'm going to be able to use the same consistent ones every single time. All right, once the bracket's fitted, nip it up. Now because we're literally just going to bolt it to the stand, and then we are going to bolt the gearbox to it and then take it off and then put it straight in the car, it's probably not necessary that it needs to be super tight. Now you could probably do this single-handed if you're super strong like me, or you can get a friend to give you a hand doing this, but it should be right to be able to stick it on the engine stand. As Peter Griffin says, lift it using a twisting bending motion. All right, now I need to turn the engine around. All right, so just got to work out which way this goes. I think it would go something like this, maybe. I don't actually know. I'm sure someone at home is probably watching me going, you idiot. Don't even know which way it bloody goes. All right, so that dowel pin sits in the top. It's cool. Now we do have a couple of bolts that we're going to use to hold that in. Now it's just a gearbox casing. There's nothing actually in this gearbox, so it is super mega duper light. Let's try and get this thing in. Flying solo. Now we only really need a couple of bolts to hold this. It doesn't need to be super duper tight. There's not really any weight in this thing, considering it is alloy. It doesn't really weigh that much, so it's not overly important. The bolts are, doing a massive job by actually holding it in. So what we might just do is we'll fit the 4 bolts at the top. That should be suffice. All right, I just had to grab myself an extension, nip those up. So that's the engine and gearbox mounted together. Job done, see you later. So the easy part's now done. Now, because the gearbox is significantly longer than the original one, we need to make the tail shaft shorter. So in doing so, we have to mount this first, figure out where it's going to sit. We have to actually physically mount it and then remeasure the tail shaft, get it cut and manufactured to suit. And then we're going to also run a different gear set in the diff. Now that's because the diff that's in it is probably going to be okay, but also we run the risk that the rev's going to be quite high, so we want to try and bring them down a little bit on the freeway. So I do have the option of having a tall or a short gear set in the diff, that is, so it really just depends what the customer wants, but I really doubt this guy's going to be doing Mach 3 down the freeway. So next thing we need to do is take it off the engine stand. We need to mount it to the crane. I'll put a chain across here, work out how exactly we're going to mount it in there. Put it inside the car, start mounting it, bolting it on, and see what happens. Alright, so if you're ever unsure of how to mount an engine on a crane, whether you need to run a chain or block and tackle, whatever, a really easy thing to do is just grab yourself a chain and just mount it through a couple of holes. So all I've done here is just mount it through the starter motor hole here, run the chain through, looped it over, put a D-shackle on there, and then down at the front, I did notice there was a hole in the bottom where it has the 950 imprint on the side of the block. So that'll give us enough room. That way I can just grab the hook, stick it directly under there, and then we're able to put it straight in. The only thing we need to be careful of here is that the engine's going to be on quite a severe angle, so it'll get in quite easily, but then once we get it in, we probably need to put the jack up underneath the back to raise the back of the gearbox, and then put the engine plate on the front of the engine, so the one that goes on here, because on this 950, essentially the engine mounts onto the front timing rear plate, unlike a Mini where it mounts on the side of the gearbox and, sorry, on the side of the clutch housing, and with a support panel on the other side underneath the crankshaft pulley. So we need to make sure we put that on there as well, and then after that, once it's mounted, we can then work out where the rear transmission mount is going to go. So let's get straight into it. Alright, so now comes the fun part of putting the engine and gearbox assembly in the old girl. So we just have to be careful when we move it across. Don't damage the car, but also we allow enough room for it to be able to slide straight in there. Now I could probably bench press this in there. And yes, I hope you guys liked that little video I did when I pulled out the gearbox originally. This is when you really need probably 2 people to be able to get this done. Oh. So I'm just going to rest it there. I just don't want it to slide, just to help protect it. Right, that way I can just confidently rest it down there and know it's not going to do any damage. So this is going to be super awkward to try and film, so I'll try and get as much of it as I can. Oh, this is going to be so not hard, just a little difficult to be able to make sure we get everything in nice and even without having any dramas, or very little dramas anyway. Come down nice and easy. Actually, it would have just been easy to put the damn engine in first and then do the gearbox, but oh well. When we go to put it in later, we will do it exactly that way. We'll mount the engine in there, put the gearbox in afterwards. I think it'll definitely be a much easier plan. So now that's beyond the front apron, we should be able to lower it down all the way now, hopefully. Right, so the only thing here is the guard cover is getting caught on it, and I can't move the crane over anymore without it twisting because of where the axle stands are under the car. So this is where you got to become MacGyver. Just come up with ideas and solutions. Oh, there we go. So actually, now that we're further down, should be able to get it in. Now, it's not really ideal to be standing between here and the crane, but considering it's not overly heavy, it should be okay. But also, in saying that, you don't want to use that as a standard means to be able to install an engine, because what will happen is the engine will stand, will let go, then it will crush you. Okay, so we're almost all the way in. Then we can get the back coming up a bit. Actually, I'll put the jack stand under it now. We'll jack up the back of the gearbox just to try and get a bit of height off it. Although this car isn't in perfect condition, we do just need to be careful, because you need to remember that even though cars aren't your idea of cars, it may not be your dream car. Heck, you might even think it's a piece of crap and needs to go to the bloody junkyard. To someone, it's their pride and joy. Now, I'm not saying that this car isn't perfect, and I'm not saying that, you know, I wouldn't own this car, but you need to remember that you should treat everyone's car like your own. Doesn't matter what condition it's in, doesn't matter where it's come from or what needs to be done to it. Always treat it with dignity and respect. Here's a question. What is the difference between a Morris Minor and a Morris Major? Pretty sure a Morris Major is a thing. Maybe I'm just going crazy. I'm sure someone out there in the comment section watching who's an enthusiast will know exactly what it is, but yeah, I'd really like to know. We'll just slip off the jack stand. It's okay, it caught it. Yeah, it's just sitting on the bottom of the jack. Okay, that's good. Yeah, Morris Minor, Morris Major. If you happen to know, let me know in the section below. All right, now this is where it is going to become super fun. And by that, I'm being sarcastic. Simply because I need to be able to push this thing back far enough to get it onto the engine mounts at the front, but also be able to align it. So what I might actually do is just rest on this front subframe piece here. The gearbox jack has it. That will just enable me to get it kind of in position that I need, reposition the crane, maybe even get a jack stand underneath it just to kind of hold it at the front. It's just super awkward because I don't have the sump on there at the moment, but in saying that, there's enough metal here to hold it, not that it weighs much. Right, so just nice and easy there. Hopefully we can just roll that over a little fraction, and that should be enough then for us to get it to where we need it. But it'll also just depend how much room we've got, and if it'll want to play the game with us. Alright, move the wiring out of the way. Some of that wiring I'm going to replace. Other stuff I'm going to wrap in conduit just to make it look cleaner, tidier and neater. Right, next thing, I'll grab the engine plate, and then we should be able to put the engine mounts on. Alright folks, welcome back. So it's actually been a couple of weeks since you saw that last clip to when you've seen this one. Now the reason for that is I got sick, I went camping, and I lost my voice. I just had no motivation, and obviously anyone that's been sick, which has been probably 99% of people watching this in the world, I just was too unenthused to be able to do anything, so I had a couple of changes in the meantime. So last time you saw me, I was mocking up the engine in the Morris Minor, but we've had a couple of changes since then, so let's just go around the shed and have a look. Oh, that's one of my old original Mini Clubman seats. All right, so we've actually got Grace in the workshop at the moment, which you guys will see on another episode. Wonder why the bonnet's up, wonder why it's like this. Let's just go have a quick little geeze and then we'll get back on track. Oh, would you look at that, there's an engine. Wonder what's going on in there. Well, you're gonna have to wait and see. All right, so I've got Grace behind me. I've got the Morris Minor on the opposite side. As you saw previously, it was on a bit of an angle, so where I am now is where it was. So I had to bring Grace over. I had some stuff I wanted to do, so we're gonna get onto that, but you'll see that in another episode. So let's have a chat about the Morris Minor. What is it that we got up to? Well, we went to mount the engine, and we pretty much capped out of that. Essentially what I found with this in the last episode was that I went to mount the engine and it just was not working. I was trying to mount the engine mounts, the towers, nothing was lining up. The engine mounts itself, the rubber mounts, actually mounted to the engine quite well, which was great, to the front engine plate, but the towers themselves didn't line up whatsoever. It was a completely different shape. I was gonna have to fabricate the absolute crap out of this thing to be able to get it going. So I went, you know what? There's got to be an easier way, so let's look into this. So between then and now, I've actually done some research and I want to share it with you guys. So in 1954, they introduced the highway. Now the highway is obviously a system that almost everyone in the world uses, or most people do anyway that have access to a car. So a highway enables you to go greater distances at a higher speed, therefore you get to your destination quicker. So in 1954, they had just revolutionized the driving capabilities of cars. They said, hey, let's get these motorways going. Now, in order for cars to keep up with them, you know, whether it be 50, 60, 70 mile an hour, whatever it may be, cars needed to be able to do that speed. So the original 918 that came in the Morris Minor was not capable of doing those sort of speeds. Even if it did, you'd probably find the thing would be revving off its tits at about 4,500 RPM. You'd probably be maxing out at about 50 mile an hour, if that, and it just would not work. You'd just have a really uncomfortable ride, and they weren't designed to do those sort of highway speeds for that amount of time with that amount of revs. So you're really gonna be inducing problems here. So what they did was they said, well, you know what, we need to now create a better engine and better gearbox, better drivetrain, better gears. So they got rid of the 918 and then they moved towards the 948, which is the A series engine. So in doing that, they then changed the gearbox, they changed the diff, and change the wheels, done, see you later. Pretty much that's it. So the rabbit hole that I went down was, in order for me to make this work, I needed to buy a set of original Morris Minor 950cc engine towers. So the tower is what directly bolts the engine mount, just down here. Sorry, there's just a bit of wiring stuff I've got going at the moment. So it mounts the tower to the body, so just here, and then the engine mount bolts directly to that, and then it mounts to the engine. So pretty straightforward. So once you do that and you mount it, that's all good. Next thing you need to do is make sure that you got the right gearboxes. So the gearbox that we have is an A-series gearbox, which is perfect. Now, how does the gearbox mount? Well, you need an A-series gearbox mount. So there's another rabbit hole I went down. Once you do that, you then need to cut the tunnel and make it work. Once you've done that, that's all good. But then you run into the problem of the original gearbox was actually shorter than the new one. So what you need to do then is either shorten the tail shaft, which ideally you don't want to do, but instead we decided we're going to go and we're going to change the rear differential. Now, in changing the rear differential, you then find that it has a different stud pattern. Because it has a different stud pattern, you then need to change the front stud pattern. Once you do that, you then need to change the wheels. So it's a bit of a roll-on effect. Now, keep in mind that manufacturers generally build cars, and yes, you can probably see Grace just over my shoulder there. Hello. Generally, manufacturers build cars that are compatible for several different models. For instance, the Audi A3, for instance, you might find it might be the same platform as an Audi A2, an Audi Q2, an Audi Q3, RSQ3, RS3, RS, every single model, because it is cheaper to manufacture one vehicle with the same chassis and use it on different platforms than what it is to manufacture 100 different platforms for one different type of car, or different types of cars, should I say. So they're trying to utilize that as much as they can. You probably find that the Audi, Volkswagen, Skoda, Lamborghini, Seat, all those sort of things, Lamborghini, if I didn't already say that, they share the same platform with a lot of things, and they just use them for different vehicles. So what they've actually done here is enable you to use the exact same products out of a later model in an early model. So that is an absolute godsend, and just means that this car is going to go together easier than what we originally planned. I thought I was going to have to hack this car up, and I really wasn't keen to do it. Now, I'm more than happy to hack my car up. I'm more than happy to, have a car in a fabrication stage where, it doesn't really matter too much if you dent and scratch and, do a couple of things, because you can always fix it. But when you're working on a car like this, the customer really demands, well, they don't physically demand, so you have to give me this, or otherwise I'm gonna fucking pull you under the fucking ground. They're not gonna say that, but the customer really asks for a lot of quality. I'm sure a lot of people out there will realize what I'm trying to say is essentially that you want to give the customer the best possible thing you can. Now, the customer's put a lot of trust in me to do this job. It is an expensive job, but it is going to be worthwhile us making the changes that we need to. So what we're going to be doing next is, as you can see, the engine is currently out of it. It is sitting actually on the floor with the gearbox. Well, that's the old engine anyway, that Colin lent me. What we're going to do is we are going to take the tail shaft out, or at least lower it. We're then going to put the engine back in, mount the engine mounts to the towers, mount the towers to the chassis. We're then going to mount the gearbox to the new gearbox mount. And then we're going to pull the tail shaft out and work out where we need to cut this thing. So I'm probably going to do that in another episode. And then after that, we're then going to pull the diff out. We're going to send it away. We're going to swap it or exchange it, whichever they want to do. And then we're going to get all the correct parts, and we can start moving this thing forward. So it is one of those jobs that if you do attempt this, you just need to make sure that you could probably make an engine and gearbox work in any sort of combination, but then it's a roll-on effect. You get more power. You then need a more heavy duty clutch or gearbox to go with it. You then need a different tail shaft. You need to look at the diff and the gearing. You need to look at the wheels. What about the brakes? How much extra weight have you got over the front axle? Does the suspension need to handle it? How is this thing going to drive? Everything is fast in a straight line, or everyone wants a car to be fast in a straight line. But if you can't stop, then there's no real point of having that 1,000 horsepower. So it's something to really consider. So take it from me. If you're going to do this, it is worthwhile doing, but it is going to be quite expensive unless you know the right contacts. Without further ado, let's get into it. Let's get this tail shaft out. Let's get the engine and gearbox back in, fabbed it up. Let's see where we're at, and then see what we need to do moving forward. All right, so I've just jacked up the vehicle, and that's enabled me now to turn the prop shaft. Now, that is a fair amount of play. in those gears. So it'd probably be the backlash that needs to be adjusted in that, but because we're getting rid of the diff, it doesn't really matter too much. But it'd be worthwhile nerding for the next person who buys the vehicle, or sorry, should I say, buys the diff, that it's going to need to be adjusted. And any good diff repair place will be able to do it. So this is going to be an absolute nightmare yet again. Seems that the 1/2 inch is too small, but 9/16 is too big. Let's go to metric and see what we can do. Maybe a 13mm might be able to get these tail shaft bolts out. All right, let's have a look. Okay, seems to be all right. Let's see if we can now, yeah. There we go. Oh my gosh, it wasn't even very tight. Now, it'll be a nylock nut as well, so it's going to take a little bit of time to get off. So, I'll quickly just pull one out and just make sure that there's no other damage or anything on there. I don't imagine that'd be not on the thread anyway. But there is a little bit of a leak as well around the pinion seal, which is this one just here. Something that most people watching this probably wouldn't know about if you own a classic Mini like me. Alright, cool, so that's all good. Pull that bolt off to the side. Now it's just a case of rotating and loosening off each one of those. So let's get that done, and then we can take this tail shaft out, and then we can mount the engine and gearbox. Alright, last bolt is finally loose. So now what we need to do, hopefully that thing will just come off, which is going to be super tight to do. But look at this. Let's get a small pry bar in here, I reckon, and we'll just pry it back a little bit, break the seal between here, and then we should be able to get the tail shaft out. Alright, here we go. There's 60 years of it been on there. Time to get off, buddy. That is ridiculously tight. Should not be that damn tight. Alright, so now it's going to be a little bit difficult for us to be able to get out. I think the next thing to do is let's get a hammer, try and break it around here. By break it, I mean just break the seal between the two. Here goes nothing. So that's starting to break the seal now. There we go. You can see it there. Now we should be able to get the pry bar in there. Hopefully separate the two surfaces. There we go. I'm just going to lay that on the ground down there. And now we can move back forward to mounting the engine and the gearbox inside the tunnel. And also, one thing I did forget to mention while I had some time off from the car, I started insulating some of the wiring. So I've got some felt tape getting wrapped around there, down around over. I still need to keep going with that one. I've done those there on the side, just tidying up a bit, you know. If you go to this extreme of what we are, and you're going to be replacing a lot of stuff, you've got the engine out of your car, it's just worthwhile doing it at the time in which you've got everything pulled apart, because to be honest, there's no better time to do it. Not that this thing has a lot of wiring at all, which is good because it doesn't, but there's some crap in here I just need to get rid of. There's extra wiring, I just need to tie stuff up, just get rid of loose ends, like literally. Alright, so I've actually run into a dilemma. The dilemma is I can't work out which way this engine mount goes. Now I'm positive I've got it in the right way, but I clearly don't. I've been on this thing now for several hours. Not really, probably been about 3/4 of an hour. But the issue I'm having is working out which way these brackets go. So as you can see here, it's tapered forward. If you swap it to the other side, it'll be tapered backwards. So you can go backwards, that's no drama. We're going to be quite short on room at the front here, how it is. But when everything's on, it's probably going to be fairly close to running to the body. Now, at the moment, we've got a fair amount of room at the back. If we push it back, it's pretty much going to bring the gearbox directly up to the back part of here. Not only that, but also we have that big sandwich plate, wherever that went, that needs to go between the engine and the gearbox, and it's probably about this thick here, so it's probably about 8mm thick alloy. So probably the plate would sit about here, then the gearbox would sit about here. It's going to be super close to the firewall. Now also the trouble that I'm having is lining up the gearbox mount underneath. So whether I've got it completely wrong and I'm just not trying properly, but also I'll just set this up so you can see, but also where the gearbox cross member sits, which is this one here. So it's got two brackets, one on either side of the gearbox, and then you've got a mount. Hopefully I can find one of those. Yeah, there we go. So the mount will sit somewhere like this, inside there, and recess into that channel there. Get rid of that. So you can see that little notch cut out, that just lines up with there, prevents it from moving. Now, if that goes here, if I just line that up there, that's all good, but the bolt holes don't line up. I think the gearbox needs to go back, but because it needs to go back, I also need to trim the floor pan a bit more. So I'll just bring the camera up a little bit more so you can see here it's pretty much sitting up against the back part of the firewall here. So what I need to really do is probably cut out another, so about an inch across, down, try and get a bit more room out of here, bring the gearbox back, move the whole engine back, and then after that I should be able to make this thing work. But like I was saying before, modifying cars to this extent, sometimes easy, sometimes it's not. And when it's not easy, you just have got to be really patient with what you're doing, because if you're not, you're going to make a mistake. What I'm going to do here is remove the engine mounts, flip them around, put the engine back in, maybe get the crane so it's just assisted, because I've only got one jack holding it at the moment. Once it's in, and I've cut the floor, put the gearbox back in properly, lift it up. Once it's in position, hopefully then it'll bring it back about an inch where it needs to be, and then it will line up. But my only concern, as I said, is that the gearbox is going to hit the firewall. Maybe I need to reassemble the entire gearbox to the engine before I put the engine in, rather than do it the other way around. So time will tell. But let's go down that rabbit hole and figure out how we're going to do this. And I think the episode is probably getting a bit long. So although we didn't really achieve much other than mocking up the engine temporarily, figuring out what the heck we're actually doing, next episode is we're going to be cutting the floor, we're going to be refitting the engine again, trying to get this thing to work. So realistically, I think that's probably it for this episode. We've spun our tyres, it's been a fairly short one, it might be quite long, I'm not entirely sure, but I've kind of got somewhere, I've kind of got a bit of an idea as to what I need to do, but it didn't really answer the question of how this thing actually goes. So because of that, I think I'm just going to have to call this episode quite short. So, bit of a bummer, but it's one of those things, like I said, it's just modifying cars, and when you get to this extreme and you're doing these sort of things, this is the reason why it is important and imperative to make sure you take your time with it, because if you're not, you're just going to throw it in and things are going to go wrong, and then you're going to get this cataclysmic problem. So you're better off always just taking your time, do the job right the first time. But next episode, we're going to cut the firewall, we're going to remount the engine, push the gearbox back, maybe reassemble the entire gearbox back inside the car with the engine, and then hopefully we should be able to get some sort of answer, but we're not going to know until we get to that point. So like always guys, stay COVID safe. We'll see you right here on another episode of Tomo's Tune Ups.